I want you to cast your mind back to 2007, 18 years ago. The iPhone was launched to the world, and it changed how we fundamentally thought about what a phone was. It effectively turned a communication device into a mini computer. It was light years ahead of anything released so far. Now, you've no doubt heard this story many times before, and you've no doubt heard people say that when we come to write the history of the 21st century, we might well point to this moment as the first of many great leaps forward. However, I'd like to offer a different perspective. 1 year later, in 2008, Apple did something arguably even more groundbreaking. They launched the App Store with just 500 applications. The Android marketplace followed soon after. Now, every software developer rushed to create a mobile-friendly version of a desktop app that were more efficient but retained most of the functionality. YouTube started to come as a pre-installed app by 2011, and even sophisticated apps like Microsoft Word eventually had an iPhone equivalent. Today, the data shows that there is overwhelmingly more traffic to mobile apps than there is to their desktop equivalents. It was not necessarily the hardware, the iPhone, that was revolutionary. It was the software that was built on top of it, and the pace of change that it allowed. This week, I believe, we're at another turning point, and we've seen another massive leap forward, just like we saw with the 2008 App Store. OpenAI made a series of announcements at their dev day, and I think the highlight of which was the introduction of fully rendered apps within ChatGPT. We're seeing the start of an LLM-first operating system, and an ecosystem which will define how we interface our machines for the next decade. And in today's video, we're going to break down exactly what these announcements from OpenAI mean for businesses and developers.
AI news. Harry V's got all the clues. It's the G-Core AI News Show.
So Sam Altman put it very simply. We're making it possible to build apps inside of ChatGPT. But this isn't just about embedding a few widgets. What Sam announced are HTML rendered applications that run natively within the ChatGPT interface. Think about searching for real estate on Zillow, designing graphics in Canva with natural language, or managing your Coursera learning, and you can do all of that without having to leave ChatGPT. You don't have to do any copy and pasting. I think this is significant for two reasons. First, ChatGPT becomes the primary interface. You won't need to bounce between websites and apps anymore. The traffic that used to flow to individual platforms will instead increasingly flow through ChatGPT instead. Second, this feels like the GPT Store 2.0. If you remember, there were custom GPTs that were announced 2 years ago. OpenAI promised monetization, but it never quite materialized, and GPT Store faded into obscurity. I rarely hear GPT Store or custom GPTs talked about today. This time feels very different. The technology is more mature, authentication is built in, and OpenAI is promising that developers will actually be able to charge for their apps. Here's what makes this particularly exciting from a developer perspective. These apps are built on top of MCP, the Model Context Protocol. Now, if you've already created an MCP server, you're literally just a few lines of code away from turning it into a fully functional ChatGPT app. You simply need to register a HTML component as a resource in your MCP server, link the tool to the HTML and perhaps the CSS as well. Let me paint then 3 immediate business opportunities here. First, there's a service opportunity. I think every business is going to want their platform accessible within ChatGPT, just like every business needed a website in the 2000s, and that's a massive market for integration services. Opportunity number 2, if you're building your own product, integrating it as a ChatGPT app with the ability to monetize when that rolls out could be transformative for distribution. Now, perhaps you're already working at a company that has a proprietary app or website. I think the next step should be to start thinking about who project manages the GPT app today. Third opportunity is that there's room for entirely new applications that are built on ChatGPT first from the ground up. So what does this look like? These are apps that leverage conversational AI as their core interface. Now, I think what we're watching here is a battle for where the source of access lives. Does it live in your operating system? Is it in your productivity software like Notion, or is it in your AI assistant? OpenAI is clearly betting that it should live in ChatGPT, and they're not being subtle about it either. They're aggressively cannibalizing every vertical they can reach. So now let's talk about OpenAI's play for workflow automation. So OpenAI have announced their Agent SDK, and this is where things get really interesting. If If apps are about bringing existing services into ChatGPT, agents are about creating autonomous workflows that can execute complex tasks. Now you can think of this as OpenAI's answer to NAN or Zapier, but it's built specifically for the AI agent era. Now during the Dev Day demo, an OpenAI engineer set herself a challenge: build a functional agent live in just 8 minutes, and she managed to pull it off. Let's take a look.
Today, I'm planning on building a workflow that uses two specialized agents. The first will be a sessions agent, which will return information about the schedule, and the second will be a more generic Dev Day information agent. So I'm starting off with a categorizing agent to just help route and categorize the type of message coming in, whether it's asking about a specific session or something more generic.
As you can see, the interface is remarkably intuitive. You can visually build workflows, add tools, implement guardrails, and even put humans in the loop for approval steps and do evals. Here's what's particularly compelling. The Agents SDK is being positioned as an open source solution, so you can run it locally on your own servers. And then this of course addresses privacy concerns that have plagued cloud-based automation tools. So from what I understand, you should be able to override the default OpenAI endpoints to use other models. And that includes open source ones running on your own infrastructure. So let's say you wanted to set up G-cores everywhere inference with GPT OSS, you can now do that. Now there's a really interesting dynamic playing out here. OpenAI is going after NAN's market. That's the visual workflow automation space. But NAN has already built a strong community and it offers flexibility that OpenAI might struggle to match. Now I think there's a great discussion here about layers of abstraction. Some developers love writing code directly with the assistance of Codex and Claude Code. Some prefer visual node-based editors, and some want to describe what they need in natural language and let the AI figure it out. OpenAI is trying to serve all three of these audiences simultaneously, which is obviously ambitious. So this raises a fascinating question. What's the best way to build with AI? Is it through natural language, writing detailed prompts describing exactly what you want? Is it through visual interfaces, connecting nodes and seeing your logic mapped out spatially? Or is it through code, the traditional programmatic approach that gives you maximum control? Now Mix, one of my friends, he's a former Google DeepMind engineer who worked on VO1. He's now the VP of Research at Moon Valley AI, which recently raised $158 million for their text-to-video technology. He made a really great point about video generation. Sometimes actually clicking a button is easier and more efficient than writing a really long, verbose natural language description. The same principle applies here. Different tasks call for different interfaces. I think we're entering this age of abundance where the friction of switching between these different paradigms is actually decreasing, and developers can choose the approach that fits their mental mode and their specific use case. So what do I think about this? I think we won't see one approach win, so to speak. Instead, we'll see an explosion of tools serving different niches and preferences. Some people will build agents by writing code, some will use visual editors, and some will prompt their way to solutions. And increasingly, they'll all interact seamlessly. Now, time for a little bit of fun. Let's talk a little bit again about Sora 2. Now, last week, of course, we talked about Sora 2, which had just been released. This is OpenAI's text-to-video model, and it got a massive upgrade this week. And of course, the internet has been having an absolute field day with it. Now, I gained access to Sora 2, and I have to tell you, it's simultaneously impressive and it's also absolutely chaotic. The interface is a bit like TikTok, with a vertical feed of AI-generated videos that you can scroll through endlessly. Now, I want to have a little bit of fun, and let's have a look at what the internet has been able to come up with a week after it came out.
Your chicken's looking nice, pal.
Woo! Yo, he stole my chicken!
Got a crispy treasure, can't slow me down. Hot and golden, I'm out of this town. Move, move, Friday, victory.
Well, get back here.
Some of my young neighbors have been teaching me new words, and one of them is Riz. It comes from the word charisma.
Hey, it's me, out here in the woods, and look who I ran into. This is the most beautiful creature. Oh my gosh, okay, he's leaving, I'm all right. Whew.
Ma'am, reason for the stop is your speed back there. Could I see your license, please?
I'm in rather a hurry, officer.
I understand, but I still need...
Forgive me.
Ma'am! Dispatch! Vehicles fleeing! Green Range Rover! Play Romeo Oscar Yankee 1!
You want to know the truth? I ain't got no dreams no more. I am the dream.
Did he just say that?
The crowd is turning on him.
This is unbelievable.
I don't know about you, but I love Michael Jackson at KFC. And look at that dancing. It's insane when we think about where the models were last year. Of course, the late Queen Elizabeth II being pulled over by a parking ticket is pretty interesting. And Martin Luther King Jr. doing wrestling commentary, obviously comedy gold. Unfortunately, it does look as if the golden era of Sora is over. OpenAI has had to quickly implement restrictions after this initial content gold rush. So for a brief window, you could actually generate pretty much anything you wanted, but now there are tighter controls around copyrighted figures and deepfakes of living people. But here's what I think is interesting from a business perspective. Sora 2 now has an API, so you can generate clips of up to 15 seconds long, and if you do some clever engineering, like feeding the last frame of one of the clips into the next model, you could theoretically stitch together longer videos. So imagine what this looks like with tools like Google's Nano Banana, which lets you insert objects into images, and you've got a really amazing pipeline for creating product placement content, UGC ads, and even episodic content. We saw people creating full South Park episodes by stringing Sora clips together. So these creative applications are really only limited now by your imagination and, of course, your computing budget. Now, one more quick but significant update. The Model Context Protocol is now available in ChatGPT Plus, not the $200 Pro plan. MCP is the underlying technology that makes these app integrations possible. It's a standardized way for AI models to connect to external tools and data sources, as we know. And what's particularly interesting is that MCP wasn't pioneered by OpenAI, it was created by Anthropic for Claude. So the fact that OpenAI has adopted it and has now added to it signals something important. We're seeing the emergence of open standards in the AI space, similar to HTTP for the web or SMTP for email, and you heard me talk about that in previous weeks. But what's really interesting is that when competing companies converge on shared protocols, it's a sign that the technology is maturing, and not a sign I think that we should ignore. Now, almost buried within the announcements this week, of which there was a lot, was this gem. OpenAI's real-time audio API is now 70% cheaper, and this is huge for anyone building voice agents or conversational AI applications. The cost has actually been a significant barrier for many use cases, and this price drop opens up entirely new possibilities for customer service bots, virtual assistants, and interactive voice experiences. Now, of course, it goes without saying that if you are deploying AI infrastructure at scale, you might want to think about G-Core's infrastructure or using an open source model. Let's take a step back then and look at the bigger picture. I think it's fair to say there have been a lot of announcements this week and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But let's try and see the broader picture. OpenAI wants ChatGPT to be your web browser, your automation platform, your creative suite, your coding environment, your research assistant. Every announcement is a land grab for another piece of a digital workflow. So let me end then by making 3 predictions for the next 12 months. First, I think we'll see an explosion of ChatGPT apps, similar to the early iPhone App Store. The barrier to entry is low, the potential audience is massive, and OpenAI will eventually enable monetization, so smart developers are already building. Second, the Agent SDK will spark fierce competition. Anthropic, I think, is obviously going to respond with their own version, and this will likely leverage Claude's strengths, which are reasoning and code execution. I think we'll see rapid iteration and feature leapfrogging between these major players. And third, I think video generation will go from something that's novelty to utility. Right now, Sora 2 is mostly producing memes and viral content, but as the API matures and developers figure out how to chain generations together reliably, I think we'll start to see business applications emerge, particularly in advertising, education, and content creation. The bottom line then. We're witnessing the birth of a new computing paradigm. Just as the iPhone created the mobile ecosystem and the web created the internet economy, LLMs are creating the conversational computing ecosystem. The question isn't whether this will reshape how we interact with technology, it's how quickly it will happen and who will capture that value. For developers and businesses, I think the message is clear. The time to experiment is now, the platforms are maturing, the costs are dropping, and the opportunities for building the next generation of AI native applications has never been better. Whether you're building on OpenAI's platform, Anthropic's, or you're running open source models on your own infrastructure with providers like G-Core, I think the fundamental shift is the same. We're moving from an app-centric world to an AI-centric world. And just like the iPhone App Store in 2008, we're only at the very beginning of what's possible. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do feel free to give us a like and a comment. I'm particularly interested to hear your thoughts on OpenAI's developments this week. There's certainly been a lot of new, amazing developments. Do you think we are at a fork in the road with AI development, and we're going to start to see things shift from this being a kind of fun technology to something that has a lot of very serious business use cases. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you next week in the next video.